All right, I think I'm up and running. We're live. Cool. All right, folks. I'm just coming live on the YouTube channel here for actually what it'll be the first time since starting HPO podcast with Dr. Baker. We didn't do any live stuff, but I think I'm going to start doing some YouTube live stuff to leverage this side of the platform a bit, and just to add a little more value to the podcast itself. Some of the stuff we can do will be up to the folks that are tuning in. So if you have questions or topics you want to go through on these, we can certainly do that for this one, as well as things in the future. Eventually, I'd like to get to a point where I'm setting specific dates and times to do this, so it's relatively predictable, and hopefully finding a time that works well for a lot of people's schedules to do it as well. Some of the other focus will just be kind of some updates. A lot of times I'll record a podcast. I'll get like super excited after talking to the guest and then wait 3 or 4 weeks to release it. So in some cases, I think it'd be fun just to come on and chat a little bit about the episodes that are forthcoming. So you have a little bit of a preview, as well as just kind of an idea of kind of what direction that I'm going with everything. So if you do have questions, feel free to drop them in the live chat section here. I'll try to keep an eye on that as we're going through some of this stuff. But a couple updates. At the moment, got some fun podcasts that are recorded this week and some fun ones coming up that are scheduled to be recorded. The ones this week, I actually had 2 guests record. One was yesterday, and I talked with a race walker, actually, which was an interesting conversation because I think it's one of the most misunderstood sports out there, because people kind of sometimes think of race walking and they automatically think, oh, well, it's walking. How hard can it be? But these dudes will break 7-minute mile pace for 50 kilometers. So it's like 31.25 miles. They're averaging sub 7-minute mile pace walking. And the guy that came on the podcast this week with me, he actually has broken 19 minutes in the 5K. So he's averaging like a low 6-minute pace for 3.1 miles or 5 kilometers in a walking state. So his name is Evan Dunphy. He's actually an Olympian. So he was 4th place at the 2016 Rio Olympic Games in the 50 kilometer, which I think he was projected to not even finish in the top 10. So it was kind of a breakout race for him. He broke the Canadian record for that one. So that's kind of a fun chat, just to hear like what the differences or the similarities between race walking and running, and just what he kind of does to prepare and train for that stuff. The second podcast this week was with Matt Pendola. And Matt is just a massive sink of knowledge when it comes to strength and conditioning. And he's got a specific interest in endurance. But we dove into just a ton of kind of cool stuff, where my focus with him was kind of basically like, what are some fundamental things that people are oftentimes missing when they get into strength and conditioning? And we looked at just like what he would say is great starting points, ways for people to kind of find out where their strengths and weaknesses are, and why maybe sometimes a specific lift is going to be beneficial for one person, but not another, and really getting into like discovering what your individual needs are on that front. So that one was a blast to do. I think we went on for over an hour and a half. So it was fun to chat with him and figure out some stuff. And I think I'm going to be trying out some of his training and strength work ideas. So it'll be fun to kind of play around with that. And I think we'll probably have him back on actually down the road, especially after I've had a chance to play around with that, some of the stuff, and we can check in and see how I'm doing with that. We had a question come through. So I'll answer these as they pop up, assuming they don't come in all that fast, which I don't think there'll be too much of a problem with that. But JC asks, would you ever do Big's Backyard Ultra? Yeah, I like the idea and the kind of like the gamesmanship of an event like that, where for folks who are interested, Big's Backyard is this event where it's like a last man standing thing, where they'll usually pick a distance that's in the neighborhood of around 4 miles. And every hour you have to complete that 4-mile loop. And you just keep going until someone's left. So, I mean, these things oftentimes go multiple days. And I mean, it's just basically a test of both mental and physical attrition and sleep deprivation, as far as I can tell. So it's something I'm interested in, but it might be a bit down the road for me partly just because I've got my 2021 schedule more or less dialed in. But it's something I think I would be interested in, maybe especially down the road when I don't have as much speed in my legs for some of these shorter events. Like, it sounds silly when we're talking about ultra marathons, say shorter events, but when you think about, like, if I'm running a flat 100-miler in under 12 hours, that's a big difference than, say, an event like Big's Backyard or a multi-day event where you're out there for, more than one night in some cases, or some of these like 200+ milers where you just don't need as much speed for those type of events. I think experience and a really good game plan are going to be more impactful than just like a lot of speed. So it's something I'm interested with. I'm trying to play my cards properly as an athlete so that I don't necessarily leave shorter distance ultras on the table as I get older and I'm less competitive in those at the expense of some of these longer ones that I can essentially do as I'm getting older. One of the other reasons this year, I'm going to be doing the Transcontinental Project. For those of you who've paid attention to the podcast are probably familiar with what I'm talking about there, but essentially in September, I'm going to be running from San Francisco to New York, which will likely be, if things go well, about 6 to 8 weeks of essentially running all day and then sleeping in an RV at night. And that is going to be in effort to raise awareness and funds for Fight for the Forgotten, who, if you listen to, believe it was episode 231 or 232 when Justin Wren came on. So he's the guy who manages that charity, and I'm going to be doing that particular event in the second half of the year, which will take up basically the second half of my calendar from a race / route standpoint. But what I'm getting at with that is I think I'm going to learn a lot on that particular thing because it's just so different from anything I've done before that may prepare me kind of a little more uniquely for something like Big's Backyard, which I'll probably try to use some of the things I learn on that particular project for events like Big's maybe in the future. JC also asks, how much is prize money a determining factor in a race you choose to enter? That's a really good question, because in ultra running, there actually isn't a lot of prize money. There are some races that offer some prize money, but really the way you make a living ultra running is somewhat multifaceted. But one of the ways is you run races that get recognized and do well at them. So for an example, one of the most competitive, or the most competitive race in the United States is the Western States 100. So if you go and win the Western States 100, there's a whole bunch of brands that will want to sponsor you. And that's where you're going to make the majority of your money from a competitive or a racing standpoint, is through these sponsors. So for me specifically, like some of my big sponsors are Ultra Footwear, S Fuels, Purpose Performance Wear, Egg Weights, Buff Headwear, Koros watches. So like there's a lot of gear that's involved with ultra running, as you can imagine. You're running all day. There's just a lot of things you need. So there's a lot of opportunity to partner up with brands that make products that you're going to use on race day, use in training, and kind of make a living that way. But most ultra runners are also doing other things too. Like for me, I podcast, coach, do some marketing initiatives with sponsors and things like that. So if you kind of stay well-rounded and build up some of your social media and things like that, those are just good marketing tools to have available to you with sponsorship type stuff. But yeah, back to the podcast. The other thing I wanted to chat a bit about is a series that we actually just officially launched in February here. They're called the Dietitians Dilemma. So I'm partnering up with Michelle Hearn, who has been a guest on the podcast as well. And she is a registered dietitian who has had a lot of health issues earlier in her life and was a very talented runner at a young age. But those health issues really kind of sidelined her for a while. And, through a lot of trial and error and just self-experimentation and stuff, found an approach to nutrition that's worked quite well for her, and it's allowed her to get back into running. So she's been just spreading the word about that. She wrote a book called The Dietitians Dilemma, and we're actually doing a series of episodes that will go through each chapter of her book essentially and kind of talk about those topics. And we are going to bring in an expert relative to that topic to help us kind of break down some of the stuff with it. So that first one actually went live on the third Monday of February, which was the 15th, and it was with Dr. Eric Westman. The second episode, which is going to go up on the third Monday of March, which will also be the 15th just of March, is with Dr. Chris Palmer. And we're talking about a little bit about just like the psychology of food and things like that. So a lot of it's more low carb specific because Michelle and I are both low carb endurance athletes. And that's going to be kind of the focus of that part. And one thing folks who've been fucking following the podcast probably recognize is like, I'll bounce back and forth between some different topics. So it's not necessarily as narrow focused as, say, this is a nutrition podcast or this is an endurance running podcast. This is a strength and conditioning podcast. I like to do a lot of different topics. So I think one thing I'm going to explore with this Dietitians Dilemma series is offering some things like that, where for the folks who are here for a specific thing, like they might want to hear about my nutritional approach or the guest's nutritional approach, folks who are more inclined to want to listen to those, they'll be able to easier identify like, oh, here's a whole series of podcasts that are on this type of topic. Those are the ones I want to pay attention to. So we got like 8 or 9 of those kind of coming up, and we're going to be doing every third Monday leading through the rest of the, I guess it wouldn't be quite through the rest of the year. It'd be pretty close though. So check those out if you're interested in kind of hearing more about the Dietitian's Dilemma and low carb application and things like that. Some guests coming up. I have a list right here. Let me pop that open. I got way too many screens on my computer right now, so I'm shuffling through them a bit. But we're actually recording with a couple of return guests that I think people will be excited about. Ted Naiman is going to actually record with Michelle and myself on Tuesday next week. And Ted's been on the podcast twice. His episodes have always been some of the higher downloaded ones, so folks seem to really like to hear what Ted has to say. He's going to talk a bit about his PE diet, protein energy ratio diet stuff, as well as how that applies to low carb and what branch of that approach fits within the low carb lifestyle and things like that. So that one will be fun. The next week, I'll be doing a recording with Dr. Jakish. So Dr. John Jakish, if you remember, we had him on, that'd have been a while ago, over a year ago. So if you remember, for those who've been listening for a while, he's done a lot in both the kind of the medical world as well as the health and fitness world. He developed a machine essentially that helps with bone density for folks who are like maybe a little old or less mobile and have a hard time getting the impact required to build bone density. So he built a machine that actually helps with that. And that's kind of what kind of launched him. And then he also makes this product called the X3 bar, which is kind of like an at-home resistance band workout system that is trying to kind of dispel like some of the myths about resistance bands. Because I think a lot of times people think resistance bands are light, high repetition type things. He made this product that you can actually like load up with the equivalent of like a 500 to 600 pound deadlift. Funny thing is actually when he first came on the podcast, this was back when Sean was still co-hosting, he sent us both one of the X3 bars, and they come with different bands. So each band has like different resistance. It goes up to this orange band, which is like their heavy resistance one. He's like, Sean, I sent you an orange band because you're probably going to need that right out the gate. He's like, Zach, I didn't even bother sending you one. So he just assumed I wasn't going to need it. And he was right. I haven't gotten anywhere close to the orange band yet, but maybe after my running career is over, if I pay a little more attention to making strength work a priority versus a supplementary activity, I can work my way up to the orange band one day. Dreams. Let's see. We got a question coming here. JC asks, 6 days in the dome, what is your taper leading up to the event, and what kind of active recovery are you doing at the end of each day at the event? Okay. So 6 days in the dome, I think if I'm understanding the question right, so the interesting thing about that is that's like a multi-event thing. You can do on paper anything from 24 hours up to 6 days. So these are timed events. You're seeing how far you can get in a specific set of time. And I did this race in 2019. I went there. I was signed up for the 24-hour just because that was the lowest time available. But my goal there was to run as fast as I could at 100 miles or 12 hours. So my taper going into that was about 2 weeks. I kind of did my peak workout, my peak week for that third week out. And then I just dropped volume and intensity going into those last 2 weeks and kind of just let everything freshen up a bit. I typically do well with 2 week tapers if it's an event that I have done multiple times in the past and have like exposed my body to this the simulation or the stimulus of going through that training before. One thing I think I learned at Desert Solstice this year, I had like a really rough race, is that if I'm going to implement a different training strategy or something that's maybe a little more foreign to what I've done in the past, I may be better served with, say, like a 3-week taper. That's one thing I would have done differently had I gone back and done it over. There's a few things I maybe would have done differently about the Desert Solstice preparation, but that's one of them if I were going to go with the same kind of training modal. But 6 days in the dome, if you're asking specifically, like, what are these folks doing during that entire time, the people doing the 6 day? That's a good question. I'm not even sure. I'm sure there's a variety of different taper approaches. My thought with something that is that long and that low intensity is the rest might look a little bit different, just because the intensity is so low. If they're getting specific with their training leading in, they're probably just doing huge volume and very low intensity to kind of work on the actual skills they're using. They may do some running and things at night just to get used to being out at odd hours of the day, goofy stuff like that. But in terms of active recovery between the days, it really depends on the athlete. There's a guy, Joe Fegis, who's got the American record for 6 days. And, you know, he'll sleep from time to time just to get like a little bit of extra rest and hit the reset button. I don't know if he's doing a whole lot of active recovery. I'm sure he's managing stuff. Like, so if he's got like an issue happening with his lower leg, he's probably got to do some sort of like, you know, maybe foam rolling or stretching and things to kind of keep that moving in the right direction. To a contrast to Joe, who I believe when he broke the American record, slept for somewhere in the neighborhood of like 30 hours during the entirety of the event. Maybe it was less than that. It was in stark contrast to the guy who got second at that event. It was Giannis Kouros, who is kind of like the go-to guy from a record standpoint with these timed events. And I mean, he's a little older now. I think he's 60 now, but he sleeps very little. I think he slept like 7 or 8 hours for the entire 6 days. And I was just thinking about that. He ran like almost 600 miles in 6 days and slept only 8 hours. I was just thinking of how challenging it would be to only sleep hours for 6 days and not run a single step, much less try to run 600 miles in the context of that. So it just kind of shows you the depth of the sport, like how kind of crazy it gets when you start moving up in distance or time. I'll say one more thing about that. There's actually a race in New York they do it every summer. And it's 3,100 miles, and they do it around roughly a half-mile loop. So the way that one is set up is you have a 16-hour block of time that you can run, and there's an 8-hour course closure at night. So that one's a little unique where they kind of force you to sleep. Whereas with like these 6-day timed events, you could decide. You could essentially not sleep at all, or you could sleep half the time. But with that one, they make you step off the course for 8 hours. And I mean, 3,100 miles, you're out there for quite a while. Essentially, that's going to be kind of like what I'm doing with Transcon. Transcon's just over, or it's right about 3,000 miles from San Fran to New York on foot with the route that I'll be doing. So I'll maybe have a little bit of a glimpse into that type of a procedure, since I will be sleeping at night for that project. Let's see. Any other questions? Drop them in the chat. I think I've covered most of the stuff I wanted to hit on from the podcast standpoint. I think I'm going to be doing some live streaming stuff on the Patreon page too. So if you're already a Patreon supporter, keep an eye out for that. I'm going to keep it at the entry level price of $1 per month. So if you are a supporter, thank you so much for that. It's helpful in carving out time for extra podcast recordings and things like that, or extra additions to this type of stuff. So if you're interested in that, head over to the Patreon page. It's patreon.com/HPO podcast. And check out some of the live streams that are coming up through there. It's also, quick plug, all the podcast episodes I do, they go up on Patreon ad-free. So if you don't want to hear the intro, you don't want to hear the ads in the middle or any of the update type stuff that I add in outside of just the conversation, that's the spot to get it. You get the early release if you sign up for the $3 tier and above. So if you want to get it like within a couple days of the recording, you can get it early there. Or if you don't care about the timeline, but you just want the ad-free stuff, as soon as I release it to the public, I bump it down to the $1 tier. So for $1 a month, you can get the ad-free version there as well once it goes public. A couple questions that came in. Are you planning on ever attempting a 24-hour event like Desert Solstice again? Yes, absolutely. I actually am really interested in the 24-hour event. I have been for quite some time. it's one where it's kind of in the same boat as like Big's Backyard, where it's getting long enough where I feel like I could be awfully competitive still well into my 40s for that particular type of event. So I haven't to date, other than this last attempt, really given it that much of a big buildup for. So it's something I'm going to be keeping an eye on in the coming years. I'm 35 now, so I'm getting close enough to 40 where, there'll be a day where like I hit a point where running my fastest 100-miler or 50-miler or 100K is behind me. And it is just from a competitive standpoint going to make more sense to move up in time or distance. So I do like the idea of at some point in my career really focusing on the 24-hour time event the way I have flat runnable 100-milers the last few years. The Jackpot Ultra USATF 100-mile road national championships, you are entered into that race. Are you aiming to break the record there? Yeah. So that's on the 23rd of April. It's that's actually gonna be a pretty competitive race now. I think Pat Reagan just signed up recently. There's a guy, I believe, who runs for the Hoka Aggies who had a really good race at the 100K road. I think that's the longest he's done, but he's going to do his 100-mile debut there. But he's a speedy guy. He'll be good. Mark Hammond, who's been third twice at Western States, fifth once at Western States, is signed up to run it. So he'll be a good competitor. Jake Jackson's ran some solid timed events in the past. He'll be there. Ryan Montgomery, who was second at Desert Solstice this year, he's done just a wide variety of different ultras, is going to be there. So we're going to have a good little field there to mix it up for 100 miles on there. And I'll definitely be going for the course record. I think it's very achievable, especially with their short loop setup that they have there now. I think it's definitely within range, and I expect at least a few guys to go under that record on race day, assuming it doesn't get like really hot out or something like that. But that'll be a fun one. I'm having a lot of fun with training right now. I'm not going to peak for Jackpot per se, at least not in a traditional sense. I think I'll be very running fit because right now I'm doing a lot of speed workouts, like short intervals, long intervals, tempo run type stuff, and I'm starting to build up my long run a bit. But really my kind of schedule or my goal for the year is to do Jackpot in April. The Pettit Center race I did in 2019 is going to be happening in June this year. So my hope is to survive Jackpot to the point where I can hop back into training soon enough and peak for the Pettit Center in June. And then after that, I need to recover from that and really start getting myself organized and ready for that Transcon project, because that's just going to be so much different than anything I've done in the past. That's kind of like my general calendar for the year from a racing standpoint. So cool. Well, thanks, folks. Anyone who came on here to check this one out, I look forward to kind of doing these a little more frequent stuff in the future. But definitely shoot me a note if you have topics you'd want to address with this type of stuff, or any add-ons that you'd like for the podcast as well. Guest suggestions, topic suggestions, release frequencies, things that are maybe unique to the YouTube channel. I know I do at the moment the full interviews, and I also do these mini clips that come out. If you like those mini clips, let me know. If there's a particular episode that we've done in the past and you'd like me to break down into mini clips, let me know. I can do that. For those of you curious, the mini clips are essentially just single topic or single question snippets from a full episode. So I'm taking these like 60 to 90 minute episodes and breaking them down into 4 to, I think 12 is usually the longest I'll do, unless it's like a really in-depth conversation about a specific topic, and drop those in there from time to time as single shorter clip stuff. So keep me posted on what you like from those, like and don't like. Cool. We got one last question I'll answer, and then we'll hop off. But Domino Fuel says, what is your go-to shoe for a road ultra? That's a good question. It's changed depending on what's been available since I've been running ultras for a little over 10 years now. But I usually, for a road ultra, like a little bit more low profile, firmer, more responsive shoe in most cases. So I've done things in like the ultra footwear, Escalante Racers, one that I've used a bit in the past. The Vanish, there's two versions of that shoe. There's a Vanish, which is a road racing flat, and there's the Vanish XC, which has got like a cross-country outsole on it, but it's a very light, nimble, responsive shoe. When I've done things that are a little more unique, like the Treadmill 100, or things that are a little longer, like Desert Solstice, I've gone a little more cushion, so I've used like the Torn for that. There's actually a new shoe by Ultra called the Ultra Revera that I've been playing around with the last week and a half or so that I really like, and I'll probably find some reason for that. It's a little more cushion than I normally race in, but it's very responsive and firm relative to the cushion. So I kind of like the fit and feel of that one. Great questions though, folks. Thanks again for stopping by. Check out the podcasts that are coming up as well as the ones on the catalog. You can get them audio as well as here on YouTube. And let me know what you got for suggestions. Email is hpopodcast@gmail.com. Hit me up there or on social. Otherwise, everyone have a great weekend.